Should the United States ever court nuclear war? Now that sounds ridiculous to even ask the question out loud, but unfortunately, given certain events going on in Washington and in Europe, in Kiev and other Western European capitals, and then the war that's actually going on the ground, it seems like that's something that has to be answered. As I've told you many times when you've watched this channel, I've laid out in a lot of detail why the fundamentals are decisively and irrevocably on the Russian side, and the longer time goes on, the more they're going to succeed. U.S. military sees, quote, value in letting Ukraine strike Russia with U.S. weapons. There's no strategy there. There's no like saying, hey, here's something tied together with other things that we're doing, other resources that we provided. And if these things take place, then it's going to give our side a chance to achieve some sort of tactical success or a victory in the war. What sense does it make to say, okay, I don't have a plan. I don't really know how this is going to get there. We'll give this a shot, if that action could potentially spawn a nuclear crisis, and with this assumption that nothing bad will ever happen, that the Adam Kinzingers of our country continue to say, yeah, just give him a test, call his bluff, see if he'll really do it, knowing that if he does, life as we know it will never be the same again, and we have to pray that it stays limited. Why would you do that? Stop being stupid.
It looks like we are moving quickly towards some sort of conflict between the United States and China. Well, let me read you what the Daily Mail has for a title. America is actively preparing for war with China over growing fears of Taiwan invasion, and crucial piece of kit that could decide conflict hasn't even been built. The Wall Street Journal's article has the title, America's New Island Fighters Are Preparing for Conflict a Stone's Throw Away from Taiwan.
These are terrifying articles. They talk about the US training now actively for a war with China. And the impression these articles give is that the United States, or at least the US military, expects this war to happen.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca, co-host, teacher, and socialist Andy Lipson, and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as @Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. We have shirts. If you'd like to have any of our merch, please contact Andy. All right. Thank you. Andy, you wanted to take the topic since you wanted to have this discussion.
Well, I have to do two things. I have to.
Oh, right. We have shout-outs.
Yes, the middle school. I think this will be the
crazy shout-outs.
The last one of the summer. My favorite student. I was instructed that I have to say that. My favorite student, Zoe. It's her birthday today, so happy birthday, Zoe. I think she's 11. So I definitely want to wish her a happy birthday. Hope she had a great day today. And just to let you guys know that, one of the things she asked in terms of a potential birthday gift was she wants to be on What's Left.
Oh, wow.
So we'll see. I told Eduardo I had an idea about how that could actually work, but we'll see. But a lot depends on well, I'd have to talk with her parents. Let's put it that way. But I have
talk to your parents first before stating.
Yeah, I have an idea for an interesting episode if they agree to it, and if Zoe wants to do it. It could be kind of interesting. So we'll see. Stay tuned, everyone. It could get exciting.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's those are announcements. I think we're gonna have a segment of announcements from now on. A minute of announcements.
Correct.
All right, go ahead, Andy. What are we doing today? I heard both of the links you sent, so I'm aware.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to probably, once I do a little mini intro, I'm going to ask what you guys made of those two segments. One, well, we're talking about Ukraine today. Well, not just Ukraine. We're talking about Russia, United States, China, Ukraine. We're talking about World War III, the fact that we're already in it. That's my first statement. It's not a question of, are we going to, World War III has already started, in my opinion. That's one thesis statement. That's part of this, but there's more to say. And I had asked Eduardo and Kenny to watch one segment by a guy, a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. military, Daniel Davis, wrote something about, is the U.S. going to war with Russia kind of thing? Or is this war going to go nuclear even? And then a segment from the Duran, which I've mentioned before, where they were talking about how the U.S. seems to be pushing for war with China, like fast tracking a war with China in relationship. Well, let me just lay out some of the things that are out there to be discussed. And then I guess I want to hear from you guys what you made of either just what I would call the facts, and what you made of the some of the assessments you read from Daniel Davis and Duran. So what are some of the facts? Recently, the U.S. has authorized Ukraine to use its long-term weapons that it will be giving to, and it's not just the United States, also NATO. Any long-term weapon you are now allowed to use inside of Russia to attack Russian targets. I think the only thing I'll say is Ukraine does attack targets along the border, but now it's saying you can go deeper into that. Secondly, what was the other thing? Oh, one of the things that got hit recently were radar systems within Russia that are deeper in Russia that are used for detection of nuclear weapons that are being launched somewhere. So there's an entire radar spectrum that these nuclear powers have to defend themselves, to know if one of their opponents launches an ICBM. Well, one of those radar systems, that's not a short-term radar, but a long-term radar, either one or two got hit by drones. Not a long-term thing, but got hit by drones. And that was seen as very dangerous. Anything else? Oh, and there was a recent Wall Street Journal article that highlighted that the U.S. had been stationed. This has been going on for a while. I know that there were articles even in March talking about how the U.S. had been stationing troops in islands near China with the aim of having those troops prepared to go to Taiwan if they needed to. So it was another one of those island hopping things that was a big part of World War II previously. And the Wall Street Journal article was really saying the U.S. is really ramping up its preparations for war with China. And the way the Duran put it is like, it seems to be like escalating that war with China at the very time that it really is losing a war in Ukraine with Russia. So I just want to get those facts out in terms of that are meaningful in terms of anything that's changed. I can't think of anything else that's either involving Ukraine or China that's significant. I will say there was a piece, like Zelensky went to NATO. Oh, this is meaningful. France. France is now admitting that they are planning on putting troops in Ukraine, but those troops are going to be advisors and trainers. They've already done that, but now they're saying they're doing it. And so the movement towards getting troops there is moving apace. And there are articles coming out in The Guardian and other mainstream media talking about how NATO and the United States has to be prepared to be able to move up to 300,000 troops into that region quickly. There's a NATO operation currently going on. It started in January that really is about establishing infrastructure for moving things from Western Europe to Eastern Europe rapidly. So this is in line with that. I think it was Operation Enduring Freedom or something like that. But this was at the same time when people were wondering, is France really going to, how is it possible Macron can talk about, troops going into the region when it was fairly clear to me that those plans were already being laid out. So that's another thing. not just NATO, but even U.S. troops are being talked about. I guess the British military, the British have announced a plan for a civilian call-up, a citizen army that they want to start creating in the line of like Sweden. And they don't put it in terms of we need more troops for fighting Russia. They put it more in terms of this helps Sweden, it will help us. But so the wheels are turning for more and more war. Last thing I'll say, and this was something that Jeff Strahl sent us about the NATO higher up in the NATO military, general of some sort, was basically saying, I mean, there was many things he had to say that confirmed these tensions are growing, and confirmed that this is really a war between the United States and China, or NATO and China, at least the United States and China, but also basically said, thank you, Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has been saying for a long time that NATO needs to do its part in fighting in building its own military. This general is saying, as much as people thinking that Trump is not a friend of Europe or of NATO, he is a friend because he's been telling us the things we needed to do. We need to ramp up our industrial capacity. We need to ramp up, our war-making ability, and this is what we plan on doing. So those are some of the facts. And I would just say that the things I sent you were in some ways people going like, how is it possible the United States is doing this? Like, what could they possibly be thinking? And they were talking as if the U.S. was crazy to be doing this kind of stuff, thinking that they could, that Ukraine can defeat Russia and that NATO troops would really work there, or that what are they doing thinking of even opening up a second front with China now when they're already losing on another front and they don't even have enough weapons for them. And personally, I think I do think there's a strategy here. And lastly, I guess there has been, what I do hear from everyone is more concern that the kinds of strikes that are taking place within Russia are antagonizing Russia more. And Russia has been coming back and saying, look, folks, we have nuclear weapons and we're prepared to use them. And if you keep this up, we may use them. So that's the kind of language that's going on. I guess that's my summary of things. Now, I guess I'd like to hear from Eduardo and Kenny, I guess, about what you made of recent events and what you heard from those folks. Oh, is there anything I left out from some of the events?
I mean, I guess recently also Russia also sent, they're doing like a military exercise in the Caribbean, right? They sent in some ships over, and I mean, at least in the article I read, it was presented as if like they didn't say anything officially, they just did it, but the U.S. military is reporting on it, that they're watching, them, and so they're doing quote unquote exercises, right? And as the United States also is doing exercises in the Pacific, and so just I think that's something to consider.
And then maybe I'll start with you, Eduardo. Is like you heard what the Duran and Daniel Davis and what I've said. I guess I'd just like to hear, as a person who maybe doesn't listen as much and pay attention to as much as I do this stuff, what did you make of what you heard there?
Well, the Western countries restricted those weapons to even to launch towards occupied territories like Crimea and other occupied territories already overtaken, not just Russia. That was before, 5 days ago, right? Mm-hmm. And I, from listening to those two, which was helpful, and that I was able to listen to it as I was doing other chores, I really did hear, especially from the first link that you said, I forget his name, the one that was just by himself.
Daniel Davis.
Thank you. That it's clear that the war is done. They've lost. Ukraine is, they're just the level of speed at which weapons could be manufactured and the manpower that they have. You have China, Iran, Russia. Those are and North Korea. Like those are just wrapped in a bundle. And these are governments that function by drafts as well. They don't function by people. And, so they've got manpower and they've got weapon machinery that is accelerated than what we do. The USA does have a very large defense system. It's true, but they're not going to use it all in just this one war. And it's also, it doesn't, there have to be in constant negotiations with NATO about those things. But it is interesting that, the manpower isn't there the way it is in these other countries, because they do have to send people by draft. And here, we haven't had a draft in how long? I mean, and even in Europe, those drafts are not as, they work those things out in other systems, in other governments. So I just think that there has to be a compromise, which was already negotiated and discussed in 2022. And those were foiled by the USA. And here we have this, people have been Ukrainian flags everywhere in support. And I think it's hard, given so much resistance for these past 2 years, how it is admittedly just done. You have to take in order for there to be prevent this nuclear disaster that could destroy and make cities disappear. We have to just come to a compromise, as these countries have to accept that there is defeat and it's going to look differently. I think that's hard to swallow. It's very hard to swallow. But as we've discussed in other episodes, and as I said, these are moving tectonics, right? Like, these are, just as the continents have shifted, like the powers are shifting, and these are the new players of the game, and that's just the way it is. So I found it reinforcing other things that we have discussed, that Russia has taken over and they keeps it advancing. They've advanced in the northeastern Kharkiv region, and that's part of the reason why Zelensky has constantly been trying to ask, we need more weapons, but we also need to start striking where it hurts most. What else did I have? Some notes. I hope that we just understand the severity of this. Maybe this is a good reason for people to leave this country. Because I don't see how moving forward with this new plan is not going to it's just lighting all kinds of fireworks that are going to really hit us and strike us back. It's going to really hit us. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, how many countries are involved? Which is the reason why I do think that, the USA sort of kneels to Israel's demands or whatever they want to do, because they can't afford to lose that ally. Look at how many strong allies that Russia already has. There was something in that, where we read where even like Iranian troops are being used in Russia. I think it was, or something like that. If I may be saying things wrong, but there are these, or drones. Was not troops, drones. Was it drones? Sorry about that. But I know it was something from Iran. So it just, that's how I feel about it, and it's very daunting. As far as Taiwan, I mean, China's already surrounded, a small country, and it is a convenient place to be, but it's also the next. It's trying to take a handle of the Middle East, the East, and the West, or Eastern West, East-West. It does come down to focusing on your own country. As, what was his name again? I forget his name. I should write it down. The first YouTuber, the one that
Daniel Davis, right?
Daniel Davis. I said, it's like we don't have to be meddling in these other countries. We just don't. And the real thing that we have to be doing is taking care of national interests. And he has maybe a different idea of what that means, but it is like we should be focusing on our whatever we have to do here in this country, not be focused on those other countries. And I couldn't agree more. Except we might have different ideas of what that means for us. But yeah, so I'll leave it at that. That's the reaction I have regarding all of this.
For me, I mean, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I heard, like I've heard in some capacity, like that, the conflict in Ukraine is not going as the West probably planned it, and that they probably expected Russia to fold or weaken, when in fact it's actually gaining strength. Its economy is strong. Its industrial production for military production is strong. They have a strategic advantage on the conflict. They're slowly grinding down what's left of the Ukrainian forces. Like I also hear that this is not over. The Ukraine still holding on, and also Russia doesn't want to rush into it. And so this brings the something that's stuck out for me from the Duran conversation was that when they came to the strategic shift, right, to the Pacific, and this is something you, Lipson, brought up a while back when we talked about like the basically the discussion at the top of the ruling class in the U.S. Who do we go after first, right? And obviously Ukraine, Russia came first, and again, it's not going as well. But China is the ultimate, enemy, because it provides an incredible opponent, right? And time is of the essence because they are strengthening, even though they may not have the military experience, right, of conflicts. But I would argue the U.S. doesn't either, really, because it has fought like weaker opponents. The one and only the people who are experienced, and with the knowledge right now are Ukraine and Russia. And Russia is the strongest military force there experience, there is in the world right now. And so, again, in the Duran, they were talking about how would they shift to the Pacific. And so this is the thing that is like the light bulb. Alex Mercouris, I think is his name, argued that one way, there's a couple possibilities. One way is to light a fire on that shit, like accelerate that war, and hopefully works out for the West, but that means what Daniel Davis is arguing, that's flirting with nuclear war, and all the repercussions that might bring. The other option, which I think is in play from what I see happening, with Europe, with France, with this German admiral that what's his name, Jeff sent us, because that was a very interesting conversation too. Admiral Robert Bauer, right, a German chairman of NATO or something. Yeah. And so they're talking about basically, again, the first option is lighting a fire, and accelerating the war with Russia. The second option is to get Europe involved, make these Europes fight, and the U.S. shifting fully to the Pacific. They're going to need that. When you consider things like, China is, and they also talk about that in this conversation, that China is producing, their Navy is growing exponentially. And they said, quote, that the U.S. can only produce a fraction of what they're producing, in terms of, a naval force. And not only that, but you also have this exchange of technologies and knowledge between Iran, Russia, China, and that you see in places like where Yemen, right, the Yemeni, the Houthis, how are they able to bring down Reaper drones? They're not just doing that by themselves. Just like Hamas, were they able to overcome certain defenses of the Israeli military, or Iran, right? exposing the all the tactical radars that protect Israel and blah blah blah. So that was the thing that stood out to me. That these like really horrible options that the West and really the U.S. has left on the table, and on top of that, this admiral, his name again is Admiral Robert Bauer. I think we can add this link also to this episode. He talked about what we have argued, right? Like the U.S. and the West in general does not have the industrial capacity. It's way behind. If it is to fight an industrial level war against both Russia and China together, especially, that they're way behind. So here is this admiral, basically calling out the political class in public. I think because of what, like you said, Lipson, he was talking about how Trump was talking about Europe paying their part and increasing their share of contribution to the NATO alliance. And so these admirals arguing the same thing, that instead of, contributing up to 2% of their national budget or whatever, they need, or their, something along those lines, they have to produce at least 2% or more in order to meet these needs and create more factories and, in order to catch up and have a chance in fighting this industrial level war, world war that is accelerating. Because I agree with you, Lipson, it's not, more countries are coming into the fold, and the U.S. is having to make this choice that I think we're gonna see pan out very soon. And things are getting hotter. I don't think that like the current events signal a de-escalation. Actually, just you're seeing the things shift into place in order for for a massive explosion of violence that I think is going to come in. I think I'm going to add this, that there is also something that is missing in all this. There is economic pressures that are eating away at the capitalist system is in fucking trouble, and so that also has to be put in this pot right here as to why the U.S. has to move faster, and make some shit happen, because whatever they're doing now is not working, and it is not panning out the way they thought it would.
Yeah, I think you all mentioned some things that I heard in what they were saying. Maybe I'll ask. I have a question for you, Eduardo, because one of the things you had mentioned was you had heard from Daniel Davis, which he had say that, number one, Ukraine has already lost this war. He said that, and because of that, he said there's going to have to be a compromise reached in, like he said, it's inevitable. It has to be. Do you agree with that when Daniel Davis says that there's going to have to be a settled compromise? And the way Daniel Davis put it, which is the longer things go on, the worse that compromise will be. The more territory will be taken from Ukraine, the more they're going to have to give up. Do you agree with the statement Daniel Davis made when he says there's going to be a compromise reached?
I mean,
even if it's a horrible one for Ukraine, there's going to be a compromise.
I hope there is a compromise. I don't think there will be a compromise because it doesn't look like the USA wants to let go of its power.
Yeah. And that's where I want to start, because
we've been, how long have we been here? And I'm sure that they know this behind closed curtains, that Ukraine's lost. Right.
And this is why I wanted to start the episode off with saying we are already in World War III. That's I can't prove that. That's just how I'm going to speak of this conflict now. It's not like World War III. We're here. And because of that, this is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq. This is existential for Russia, but it's also existential for the United States and Europe in relationship to holding on to the power that they've had. If they lose in Ukraine, and when I say they, I mean United States and Western Europe and NATO. If they lose in Ukraine, they believe they have lost the globe. Bauer also acknowledged that Russia and China are taking over in Africa. And he acknowledged that on many of the resources that they need, Russia and China already have the lock on main resources that are needed for green economy or really just for tech. By building their power base in Africa and Russia holding on to its power, that also means uranium and some of those really important resources for war. And oil is obviously an important part. And Europe is, this is what Bauer didn't talk about. Europe is in a worse economic position because it has to rely on more expensive oil, the oil from the United States. So I don't think there will be a compromise reached. I think this is the. I think that to me, this is the battle for everything. And the Duran mentioned the idea of a set of neocons that want to shift to China. I don't think there is going to be a shift. It's not about shift, in my opinion. It's not about shifting to China. It's about drawing China into the war. The U.S. knows from its own experience that if you can just allow the other powers to fight and just sit there off the stage, that is a very good situation from which to like actually win the globe over. That's exactly the role the United States plays. So the U.S. is not going to shift to China. What the U.S. is trying to do is they've already, in my opinion, they've already recognized that Ukraine isn't losing this war. It's not a war for Ukraine to lose. It's never been about Ukraine. This is a war between China and Russia and the West that involves China and ultimately the West, as the Bauer had said, the NATO general, he says the fight with Russia is about fighting China and related to that as well, or that's the bigger opponent that's always there waiting in the wings. So I don't believe that the U.S. is going to say, we'll take China, NATO, you take Russia. That's not a scenario. NATO is run by the United States. The United States knows that when it draws China, if it's drawing China into this war, that is fighting a two-front war. It also knows that conventionally, it's not just behind the eight ball, because when we talk about artillery production, we talk about 5 million per year for Russia in terms of North Korea, Iran, and China, what they can do. And when we talk about Europe and the United States, we're talking hundreds of thousands of shells per year. Those are orders of magnitude difference. And that's not getting any better for two reasons. Because economically, the United States' best days are in its past economically. Saudi Arabia just said we're going to get involved with the digital currency with BRICS and things like that. The economic place for the United States is not getting better, it's getting worse. And so I believe that the U.S. knows that it cannot win a conventional war, and that is what is at stake. It's not about Ukraine losing a war. It's about first what their intention was. It was the U.S. always was fighting Russia to just bleed Russia and to weaken it so they could take on China. That strategy has failed immensely. They have strengthened Russia. Russia knows better how to fight a war. Russia knows better about all these things, like all these electronic wonder weapons that the U.S. has are, one, getting destroyed, and two, getting figured out, so that Russia has developed electronic countermeasures that have advanced immensely so that when ATACMS missiles go through the air, they don't hit the target as much because the U.S. Russia has developed ways of doing electronic countermeasures because they've learned about their equipment. They've learned how to fight that stuff. So to me, I think and everyone's wondering, what are they doing? They're pushing. It seems like the United States is pushing us towards nuclear war. And that's what I do believe is happening. I do believe that the United States knows it's already lost. In my opinion, they know they're in World War III. They know that they've lost the conventional war. There's only one war they can win, which is the nuclear war. And that's the war that I think is being accelerated towards, because the long-term prospect for the U.S. winning a nuclear war, I know this is going to sound crazy, doesn't get better because China is developing nuclear weapons rapidly. So their best chance to do this is when they are right up close to Russia. And let's be clear, they've just given themselves the right to do long-term. Here's what the United States has allowed it for itself. They've given themselves the right to do long-term strikes of weapons into the region. This summer, F-16s are coming into the Ukraine. F-16s, one of the features of F-16s is it can be fitted with nuclear weapons, okay? Which is one of the reasons why people think it's going to be such a target for Russia. It's true. So the U.S. is pushing Russia to say we're going to. It's like thumping its chest, like trying to pick a fight with it, a nuclear fight with it. And I do believe the U.S. By and large, I believe the U.S. has already assessed that it cannot win a conventional war. It can only win a nuclear war. And this is where I think something I heard Scott Ritter say, and I know that you hear some of the things he says, Kenny, and this made the most sense to me. Their scenario for winning a nuclear war is with pretty much saying that 40% of the U.S. population is remaining after that nuclear war. But what we have to assure ourselves is that we come out on top in relationship to all our competitors. But I think it was interesting when Scott Ritter said that, and they acknowledged this. Competitors don't just mean Russia and China. It also means India. It also means Brazil, which basically means the U.S., to win a nuclear war, the U.S. must not just, somewhere along the line, it's not going to be good enough just to strike Russia and China. India has to be destroyed militarily and has to go down in a nuclear war. Brazil has to go down in a nuclear war. Everyone has to be flattened except for the United States, which accepts the loss of 60% of its population and industry, and they can come out on front. And that's the scenario. So I don't believe what the United States, like Daniel Davis kept saying, they're crazy. What are they doing? They are not crazy. They just will accept. They cannot accept defeat, because if they accept defeat, they lose in this. And the same thing that Daniel Davis said, what does Russia do if it looks like it's going to be defeated? They will send their nuclear weapons out. That is the exact situation the United States is in. And I know Daniel Davis does not see Ukraine as existential for the United States and for Europe. It is, because they set those terms immediately. Because the war, Ukraine was not about Ukraine. Ukraine was the battle place between the United States and Russia, and U.S. is losing. It's almost as if there's a enemy right on the border of the United States in which they are losing a war. So what are they going to do? Daniel Davis accepts that if Russia found itself behind the eight ball, if U.S. was actually successful in what they were doing, that Russia would have to lose its nuclear weapons. And they would send them flying. And he knows that. That's also true, and especially true for the United States. And that is the situation we're in. And this is why I also want to say that for any of you who thinks that, oh, I want to be a Biden support, I want to be a Putin supporter or a Xi supporter, I get it. I actually applaud that. If you're in the United States and you want Russia to win, good for you in some ways. But understand this. None of these people are going to save us from this. Like, the only way to, in my opinion, because I do believe Scott Ritter is right, and I do believe that the U.S. is not stupid, but the only scenario that they win is nuclear war, and their chance of winning that and being the coming out victor is better sooner than later. That's what I want to say about this. And so I ask people to look at what the United States is doing as very smart, if you will, smart given that they've already fucked themselves and they lost in a place that they didn't think they were going to lose. They thought they were going to be able to drain the Russian economy. They thought they were going to be able to drain the Russian military, and it went the opposite. But understand this, they are not lying. It is not wrong for when they say that winning in Ukraine is existential for the Western United States. I find that to be a completely factual, true statement. That if you're playing this board game and you see your opponents taking everything, that if the U.S. loses here, it's gone. It's over for them. They are going to have to cede all this kind of ground, and they will not. No empire is going to do that. And so I just wanted to say that that the thing that I wanted to challenge was this notion that the U.S. is crazy, that the U.S. is stupid, or that this strategy doesn't make any sense. And I also want to challenge the idea that the U.S. is going to tilt away from Ukraine and go somewhere else. That's not going to happen. The U.S. is drawing all its enemies in, and I wouldn't be surprised if, by the way I'm thinking, at some point the U.S. has to draw India in, because they're going to have to get shelled as well. Not shelled with, but they're going to have to get nuked as well for the U.S. to come out of this victorious. But think about these people. Like, think what they were willing to do in COVID. Of course, they'll be willing to scrap massive sections of the population in order for them to come out on top. And I mean our own population. And that's what I think the victory scenario is. And I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I just want to add on to this whole notion of our the ruling class in the U.S. is stupid, or is incompetent, or is crazy. In terms of like there's no logic to what they're doing. It's like they're playing a very dangerous game against people who are they also want to fucking win. Like this is the Russian ruling class. This is the Chinese ruling class. And all of these people know history, and they understand what it takes to win. In the recent Russia or really China, with Russia's help, is going. They smell blood in the water. And BRICS is not gonna save this shit from happening. Because I just feel like there's people who are celebrating. Some of the people I listen to, Garland Nixon, and they keep talking about our stupid, incompetent ruling class, and how like somewhat celebrating the BRICS alliance, and that again, the game is where Lipson is talking about, because this is how I see the system working. It's fundamentally underwritten and held together by violence, and whoever is willing to cause the most fucking pain, and willing to sacrifice the most, in order to win the game. It's not about sharing. Like it's not about sharing, and so that's what's at stake. So picking sides, like for me, Russia or China winning, there is no winning there. You just presented the scenario that is more likely to happen, and I don't know other than, again, revolution, and not just here. Like it has to spread. Like the Russian people are gonna have to go against their own. The Chinese are gonna have to go against their own ruling class. Because that's what's at stake. Like we're not, like, the masses of people are not driving the bus. We're just there to be used and be Ukrainians. In order to play this dangerous game. And it's just it's scary. Because this is what I see in these conversations. That a lot of the things we've been talking about are happening. Like in the reality is that I do think there was a miscalculation of the U.S. ruling class. It doesn't mean they're stupid or crazy. They made their bet. It just didn't fucking pan out because someone else had another bet. And they have other tools in fighting, and that's what I also think. Like, we're talking about the U.S. being behind industrially, not the U.S. and the West, behind on an industrial capacity. That possibility is fucking over, of catching up, playing that conventional warfare. Like that game is done. There is no way the U.S. and the West can catch up, in the time frame, because Russia and China are not getting weaker. They're not waiting for the fucking U.S. to catch up. They're playing to win, and they I do think they want to keep it on a conventional level.
Yes.
But the U.S., if it wants to maintain its hegemony and power, it has to destroy, because now it's not just, like you said, China and Russia. BRICS, it does show something. The rest are also trying to speak up in some way and get their, trying to, turn the conventional tables, right? Like the economic agreements and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, all that is bullshit, because also remember, like, this guy Bauer, General, also reference, like, the resources that are, like, you also talked about that, listen, that are locked up in Russian and Chinese territory. If they, that shit is gonna need to be unlocked, and you're not gonna unlock that by fucking talking trade and shit, because that is over.
Right.
I mean, my reaction to it, Andy, is that it's very how you're saying. I mean, that we are screwed basically, and that there is no way out of massive massacre of people simply for the sake of trying to win something, and that's what power does to one. That they have to try to even pulling all of the countries with you, even Mexico, because it's right there in North America, or Canada and NATO with you to come to the top, and at the cost of it, people will die. That's not how these things are laid out in the news anywhere that I see. And I for anyone that might be like, well, I don't think that. Well, I mean, if we see Madame Albright, how she just plainly said that, I forget how exact her words she said, but the cost of people's lives are necessary to.
The number that was put to her in Iraq was 500,000 people died to put Saddam Hussein in a box. Is that worth it? And she goes, yes. And she just, it was children and older people. That's what was the number. And that, so she didn't argue about the number. She just said, yes, it was worth it.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
So in the second link that you sent us with the two folks that we're discussing,
the Duran,
remember, what they said that stuck out for me was, they said that there is, no matter what, a protest or any persuasion that could happen, you essentially have to be a neocon to be able to convince other neocons. You can't. That's because they're moving forward with this. One can always hope, right? That the best thing to do is not to give up, and for us to move and to bring bring a lot of attention to the prevention of another nuclear disaster and war, and that we organize to do that. But I see people, I don't know, after 2 years, get normalized with how things are going, and they don't see much movement, and it's not affecting us here. But with these new restrictions lifted and Russia threatening, there is that possibility of a large amount of people dying. You mentioned a figure, maybe 40%, or I don't know, like, obviously big cities will be targeted, as always. So I get concerned, and that's my reaction to this, that it's obviously not laid out this way, and I'm concerned for people who may not be paying attention, and I appreciate you bringing this attention to us.
Yeah. And the question that I think I saw an interview with Jimmy Dore, because Scott Ritter was trying to get to Russia to go to a conference, and he wasn't allowed to go. He was picked up by marshals who took his passport and said, "You're not allowed to go to Russia and speak. We're taking your passport, and we're going to send you home." But Jimmy Dore was like, "Well, what's going on? Why is no one talking about this?" And he rightfully talked about the quote anti-war movement in the United States as being fractured and weak, and which is true. So I do think with that, there's going to have to be more than an anti-war movement, but at least that. Well, I'll say some more about that. But some of the things that are stopping those of us who oppose the war from even factoring into opposition is this notion that there's a multipolar salvation from this is causing people who oppose this to be spectators, because what they're counting on is they're counting on the actions of some other ruling class to come in and save the day. They recognize rightly that the U.S. ruling class is bankrupt. Some of them think that Trump is an alternative. I think Bauer should make you realize that there is no alternative, and that in itself, this Trump-Biden thing does a lot to make people think, again, that there's some savior that's to be found up there. But for those people who at least who say the U.S. state is done as an actor for good, like the U.S. state is the problem, if you think the Russian state and the Chinese state taking action is going to save us, you're wrong. This ends poorly for all of us. It is true that most revolutions, in fact, I think almost all revolutions that have been meaningful, have occurred in the context of a state losing in a war, and in the context of losing in the war, its own troops refuse to fight for it, and its own people refuse to submit to the will of its ruling class. In my opinion, that is the only way out of this. Is what Kenny said. It was a revolution, but that will mean the U.S. soldiers will refuse to fight for the U.S., and it means the U.S. population will refuse to submit to the U.S. And if you are voting for Donald Trump, you are preparing to submit to the U.S. state. If you are voting for Joe Biden, you are preparing to submit to the U.S. state. If you're voting for Jill Stein or Cornel West, you are preparing yourself to submit to the U.S. state. We have to be done with any of their institutions, and we're very far away from that. But that is what needs to be built. That is the conception we're going to need to develop and then go across for people, and basically just say, we're taking the power out of your hands because we know where you're going with it. But you will notice one of the things that's really interesting about this election, Ukraine's not getting talked about a lot. Even China and Taiwan's not so much. Actually, there's more about genocide in Gaza, which is true, but in many ways it really limits the scope of what that war that's happening there is just a piece of a broader war that's taking place. Like I said, we're in World War III, and part of World War III is taking place in that region, but it's only a piece. I think its central wedge, which is what the people in Iran say, and I agree with them, is still taking place in Ukraine, because that is the place where U.S. and Russia are meeting with their armies, with their forces, and that's where U.S. is being defeated right now, and that's why it's the central place. But I think as long as we continue to find ourselves in this position of spectator to this, then there's no hope to stop it, other than soldiers refusing to do stuff. But most of these things are automated now, and most of these things have AI dead hands. And I'll give you one that I know about that I heard about only recently, which is what's called the Poseidon. It was labeled Poseidon for Russia, and basically what it was it's a set of submarines that have essentially like Tsar bomb level munitions on them, which are things that are way bigger than Hiroshima, like hundreds of times more powerful than Hiroshima. And in the course of any nuclear strike on Russia, those things will basically send underwater bombs, not ICBMs that go through the air, but underwater ones that will go into the ports along the East Coast. I don't know if there was along the Pacific, but along the East Coast, and essentially blow the entire East Coast up with bombs that are, like I said, I think they're like 200, 300 times the size, maybe 1,000 times the size of bombs that went in Hiroshima. And they're just going to detonate underwater in the ports of cities across the East Coast. So that's just all wiped out. And that happens if the U.S. does a first strike or a second strike. And so it's just what these people have planned is deadly, and they're going to have to be taken out, like Kenny said, all of them. And I know that that's but our job is not to take out Putin. Our job is to take out our U.S. state, to do what people thought January 6th was about, which it never was about, but to do something on that order in cities across the country and remove political and economic power out of their seat in all across the country. And that means corporations and the state, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, all that stuff has to be taken down internally. And that's the scale, in my opinion. And if it doesn't happen, this is where I think we're headed. And if there is a compromise reached in Ukraine, then that would be a surprise to me. If the U.S. does shift its focus from Ukraine to China and then start only fighting China and leave Ukraine to be fought by NATO, which I cannot possibly see happening, then again, that would say that way I'm looking at it is wrong. But I suspect what you're going to see is an acceleration of bringing more parties into this fight, because the U.S. knows that as long as its enemies are kept out of the war, then the U.S. is losing in relationship to them.
And for me, this is where, I don't have a pulse on what's going on with like the freedom movement, being preoccupied with my kid. But this is where I invite, more people who maybe have a narrow scope, of what the forces we're fighting against are about, because I feel that, this process that we're witnessing right now, because I think that if you are someone who's even casually listening and, to different people, these analysts and stuff, and the shifts, the tectonic shifts that are happening globally, the world has changed. It's never going to be the same, and we're accelerating. And it's a process that, at least for me, came into more focus as a result of the pandemic. That to me is where shit started fucking accelerating. And like I like to share a quote by Gramsci, and because I've always liked quotes, but I think it's more relevant now than ever. And I don't know if this is the exact quote, because they get changed and stuff, but it's the essence of it. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time for monsters. And so, that to me encapsulates what's happening. Like, shit will never be the same, as it was prior to 2020. There were things happening that, that we're going to, change always happens, obviously, but 2020 represents that massive change. And it is connected to all together. The COVID shit is not separate from this for me. And I don't know the full story. I don't know the full connections, but to me, it's not disconnected. It's the same forces that lie to us, that want us keep us bogged down in our lives, to just fucking accept the status quo, and to not, have some sort of faith about the future that can be taken into our own hands, right? Because someone made a comment on the last episode on YouTube about revolution, and they brought up important questions about death and dying, and that's not what I when I talk about revolution, I'm not looking for death. I'm actually fighting for life, and there is a cost to be paid, because we are fighting monsters. These are the people who rule our lives, who have us in these boxes and in these autocratic systems, these dictatorships at the workplace, these dictatorships at the medical place, and on and on and on and on. And so it's all connected, and it may be hard for some people to see, right? Like, because they might be new to these big picture things. And and I hope, that different people keep telling me, I hope you're wrong, and I hope I'm fucking wrong. But unfortunately, what we keep saying keeps happening in some version, and it's not always exact. But the major flow of things, it's going to that place where it's massive fucking collisions, because that's how it's settled. It's not settled to negotiations. It's not settled through to trade. It's not settled through at the top, at the top. I mean that, like, it's not settled through states and ruling classes, negotiating with each other. They're always in it for the big prize, because that's how the system works. It cannot be shared. There is no multi-portal balance. Even some people like might look back at the fucking Soviet and capitalists, even though it was some form of capitalism, but they look at that as some sort of balance. But I remind people, there was a lot of fucking death that happened in that supposed just tension that was like more peaceful than other times. Death has never stopped. There's always people dying. It's just that now we're witnessing the acceleration of this process that we think ends on a fucking cliff, off the cliff. And so that's what we're facing. And this is what again, our only option is revolution. I don't know how to start it. I've been beaten down in different ways. I've learned my lessons. I'm at a loss, but I also understand it's not just my job. In I talk of revolution because that means an upending of this system. The shit that we have it doesn't work for us. In I guess if you're not witness to the horrors of firsthand horrors of this shit, of this system, you might think it might not happen to you. But that's where I'm saying, we're all in this net together, and we don't know what kind of slaughterhouse we're gonna end up in if we don't do something about it. Yeah.
And I'll just point to one other theory that's out there in the freedom movement that we've heard that is an alternative to what we're saying, which is no Andy, no Kenny, and no Eduardo, if you think this is a psyop, and they are going to build this fear to an ever growing crescendo, that crescendo of fear will be solved by the global government that will come in, and that global government is going to be a lockdown, right? Like, it's going to be a technocratic trap. That would also cause you to not necessarily build an anti-war movement, because you say, I'm not getting involved in your head fake. I don't believe that's what's happening. I don't believe that this ends in a technocratic one world government. So that viewpoint would also would lead a person to say, I'm not going to get involved in thinking that bullshit is something I should be paying attention to. I'm looking over here to what's happening. And it would be more like, I'm not going to accuse Allison, but like the kinds of things that Allison's looking at, which is that structure that's being built. And again, I do think those things are important. I just think that all this stuff's going to get, all that board's going to all get tilted, pushed over by something much bigger than any single capitalist center. And I still do believe that this world is not run by one global group, but I believe it is an interaction of state competitors. That's the theory that runs my thinking. So that would be another reason for people who agree with us to say, nah, I'm not, I hear what you're saying. Yes, it's frightening, but it's intentionally frightening, and they're trying to frighten you into blah, blah, blah. Now, mind you, I don't think if we accept, oh, thank God we didn't have nuclear war, now let's take the technocratic digital economy, one digital coin, one government. I agree. We have to get rid of that, but that does not describe the world I think we're in. So I don't think that's happening.
And for me, like, I wonder too if like this technocratic shit is in play because they will need to run a world with less people. in concentrate, and manage people even more, and fear will play, not fear, but the shelter in place will play a role in that new world.
I mean, everyone's seen how AI is much like post-COVID. Everyone sees how it's almost like out of COVID came AI, right? Like it's so entered into our world. AI is just data collection, and ultimately the data collection that it's going to feed the AI is really about war making. Yes, it's a war on workers, but it's also a war with each other. So we have to understand, again, DARPA products, this is all being built not to create papers that students can cheat on. It is being built so the US can defeat China and Russia in a war. And AI features large in that. That was one thing that Bauer said. He talked about how AI had changed the way drones were being used. Well, it's going to change. It's going to be a feature in every part of war. And so I think that's what I think this technocracy that people talk about, and the digitization, it is now just a tool of war competition by and large, as opposed to a tool of building a global prison that trapped us in using a nuclear war head fake. But I'm not gonna, like, there are people we have on the show. I love Jake. I think he thinks more that way than the way we're talking. He'll acknowledge that they could still fuck it up and go to nuclear war, but he thinks that they're doing something else. I respect him. It's just, I mean, these are the differences that cause us all to kind of like look at one thing versus another. And, we're just going to have to go through that.
Maybe we might have a discussion with them online, since we might invite someone to have a different alternative that I'd like to actually listen to and see if it's. I mean, I have not participated in the recent Workers and Students for Choice. I've not had the Pulse been in other groups recently, but I would like to know what is that stand out.
Yeah. I think people will tell us in the comments, like the person Kenny mentioned, Thorne. He has a different view about this than we do, even though he knows things are not going well. So I think some people will tell us in the comment section what their view is. But this is mine. I think me and Kenny seem to be on the same page. And Eduardo, it sounds like you're like, okay, Andy, I see what you're saying.
I do believe that we are. I mean, I believe this is not a psyop, but I don't know if I'm ready to fully accept that, or maybe I'm resisting for some reason, that the USA is planning something that is very consciously knows that great amounts of people will die. I mean, how could I not accept that? It's already happened in history. We've seen it. But it's hard. It really is hard to see how these players are playing with all of our lives.
I appreciate your honesty, Eduardo, and it is it's really hard to fathom. I think I only believe it intellectually. I struggle with it spiritually or emotionally almost. But I think everyone's going to have to do their own gut check on this thing and ask themselves. And I think it's exactly the way you put it, Eduardo. You have to really ask yourself, do you think these people are capable of this? Or something along those lines,
Again, this is, for me, this is like, I come to this view, because of what I believe this system is about, the capitalist system. And so that is my conclusion, and like, I'm not fully knowledgeable, and I'm also basing in what I'm seeing happening, in front of me, because like we theorize, and then like if some shit happens that proves that point, then there we go, and so it's not just pure speculation. Like, it's speculation based on recent happenings, and like COVID showed me the level of viciousness. I mean, if you understand COVID as just simply a global health emergency, of course you don't know what these fuckers are capable of, and in, like, if you don't understand like some proven facts of history of how these people, the ruling classes are willing to sacrifice people, then you don't know the stakes of a global empire that is in decline. That's what I love. I like that Alex Mercuris, I think is his name, I don't know, but Alex Mercuris cited Spain in the 1600s, and that it was superior technologically, and it probably had a better hand in the US, and it collapsed in just seconds. But Spain didn't have the reach to the US, or the really the destructive power that the American empire has. And I keep bringing it up because it sticks in my mind. Like the death of the British Empire was insanely violent. Every empire, as it collapses, dies a violent death. And again, we have a global empire, like a global death machine, that doesn't want to fucking die. Its instinct is to survive at any fucking cost. And it's not about morality, it's about winning and surviving. And so that's what we're facing, but again, I only, because that's how I see the world. I don't like, I see the good intentions, I see the good faith, that in the masses of people and the people that I interact with every day, not on the fuckers that we don't even see or know, but that are moving pieces and that are gonna use us as, pieces on a board that can be sacrificed at any point. And so, again, it's just why I call myself a socialist or Marxian socialist, to take a little from Jeff or whatever. That's just, how I analyze things.
I have nothing else to add except just to sit with what we've.
Yeah, some things for people to think about. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's actions that need to be taken, but we're in no position collectively to do much. So the question of how to get there, I don't have an answer to.
We still have to do an episode on guerrilla forces around the world.
Yes. But we'll talk about Mexican elections next week.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Andy, for this ongoing discussion. When I think I sit with it the way that I've done it with Alison McDowell's informative episodes that we've had on with her. And how do you react to an assault of information that's affecting you and your life and your plans for the future, and you feel overwhelmed by it? And that's how I feel about all this. Anyhow,
I think the best way to end this episode is to say happy birthday, Zoe.
Happy birthday, Zoe. And yes, there's some hope, and we find humor in the cracks of things.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, these middle schoolers are taking over What's Left.
Yes.
What's Left is a weekly political podcast that's challenging the mainstream left. It is not What's Left is a weekly political podcast where you can give your shout out to your students. We post information about our topics, not about our students and our guests on the episode notes where you found this episode, or on our blog. Not for students. What's Left podcast.com. All right. You can find past episodes to this podcast /channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, or share your favorite episode where we found this episode, including by word in your classroom, as it seems now, and making all kinds of crazy requests. And you can find us on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard, or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. Any other shout-outs, please contact Andy. I'm Eduardo Varca with co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. Thank you all for listening. Check us out next time. Ciao.
Nice job, Eduardo. That was a good ending. I like that. That was funny. Stop recording.